Olivia Hartwell wiped down another helicopter blade with methodical precision, her weathered hands moving across the metal surface with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. At 34, she had perfected the art of invisibility at coastal emergency flight operations in Galveston, Texas. Dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, standard-issue coveralls that hung loose on her slight frame, and a quiet demeanor that made her blend seamlessly into the background of the bustling hangar. To her colleagues, she was just another ground crew member, reliable, knowledgeable about aircraft maintenance, but unremarkable in every way that mattered in the high-stakes world of emergency aviation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What nobody at Coastal Emergency noticed was how Olivia's eyes tracked every aircraft movement with the intensity of a predator, or how her fingers unconsciously mimicked flight controls when she thought no one was watching. They didn't see her. Pause during her cleaning routine to study the instrument panels with an intimacy that went far beyond basic maintenance knowledge. When pilots discussed weather patterns and flight trajectories, Olivia would slow her work, absorbing every technical detail while maintaining the facade of disinterest. Her supervisor, Chief Paul Anderson, valued her mechanical expertise and reliability, but like everyone else, he saw only what she allowed them to see, a dedicated ground crew member who knew her place. The irony wasn't lost on Olivia as she watched the pilots prepare for their morning rescue drills. These men, some barely out of flight school, treated the aircraft with a mixture of respect and casual familiarity that spoke of routine rather than reverence. They would climb into the cockpits of the rescue helicopters, run through their pre-flight checklists with practiced efficiency, and lift off into the Gulf Coast sky with the confidence of those who had never been told they didn't belong there. Meanwhile, Olivia remained earthbound, her own extensive flight experience buried so deep that even she sometimes forgot it existed. Director Graham Ashford's voice cut through the hangar noise as he briefed the morning shift. A tall man in his 50s with silver hair and an authoritative bearing that commanded immediate attention. Ashford had built coastal emergency flight operations into one of the most respected rescue services on the Gulf Coast. His pilots revered him, and his word was absolute law within the organization. Weather reports show a tropical system developing in the Caribbean, he announced to the gathered team. Nothing immediate, but I want everyone sharp. Emergency calls have been picking up with the tourist season, and I won't have any unnecessary risks taken. His eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on the male pilots before moving past Olivia as if she were part of the equipment. The subtle dismissal stung, but Olivia had grown accustomed to being overlooked. It was safer this way, she told herself. Safer to remain invisible than to risk the kind of exposure that had destroyed her world 6 years ago. She continued her work, methodically checking hydraulic fluid levels and inspecting rotor assemblies, while the pilots received their assignments for the day. Marcus Webb, one of the newer pilots, struggled with a particularly complex weather briefing, and Olivia found herself silently solving the navigation problems he couldn't quite grasp. The urge to help, to share her knowledge, burned in her chest, but she forced herself to remain silent. As the morning shift dispersed, Olivia retreated to her small storage area at the back of the hangar. Hidden behind stacks of spare parts and maintenance manuals was a dented metal locker that she had claimed as her own. Most days, she ate her lunch here in solitude, watching through the small window as helicopters took off and landed in an endless dance of emergency response. But today, something had shifted inside her, a restlessness that she couldn't quite shake. She opened the locker and pushed aside her spare coveralls and safety equipment to reveal a wooden box tucked in the very back. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it out, the weight both familiar and foreign after months of deliberately ignoring its existence. The box had belonged to her father, a career Navy pilot who had taught her to fly before she could properly drive a car. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, lay the remnants of a life she had been forced to abandon. The Distinguished Flying Cross gleamed dully in the hangar's fluorescent lighting, its ribbon still vibrant despite the years. Beside it lay her military pilot wings, the gold worn smooth from countless polishings, and a photograph that never failed to bring tears to her eyes. In the picture, a younger Olivia stood beside a military rescue helicopter, her flight suit bearing the insignia of the 41st Rescue Squadron. Her smile was radiant, confident, the expression of someone who believed the sky was truly the limit. Captain Olivia Hartwell, distinguished graduate, U.S. Air Force Helicopter Pilot Training Program. Read the inscription on the back in her father's careful handwriting. Following in her father's flight path. The contrast between that confident young officer and the woman she had become was stark. Where Captain Hartwell had commanded respect and admiration, Olivia, the ground crew member, inspired only polite indifference. Where the military pilot had saved lives from the cockpit of sophisticated rescue aircraft, the civilian mechanic could only watch from the ground as others took to the skies. The transformation had been deliberate, necessary for survival, but no less painful for its calculated nature. A knock on the storage room door startled her back to the present. "Olivia, you in there?" Marcus Webb's voice carried a note of urgency. She quickly closed the box and shoved it back into the locker, wiping her eyes as she composed herself. "Just finishing up my inventory," she called back, forcing her voice to sound normal. "What do you need?" "Ashford wants to see you in his office. Something about the maintenance reports." Marcus sounded puzzled, as if he couldn't imagine why the director would want to speak with ground crew directly. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. In her 3 years at Coastal Emergency, she had successfully avoided any direct interaction with Ashford beyond the occasional nod of acknowledgement. She preferred to submit her reports through Chief Anderson, maintaining the buffer that kept her safely anonymous. A direct summons to the director's office felt like a spotlight being turned on her carefully constructed invisibility. "Tell him I'll be right there," she managed, buying herself a few moments to steady her nerves. As Marcus's footsteps retreated, Olivia caught her reflection in the small mirror she kept in her locker. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the confident pilot in the photograph. But buried beneath the deliberately plain exterior, behind eyes that had learned to hide their true depth, Captain Olivia Hartwell was still there, waiting. She had no way of knowing that Hurricane Ophelia was already beginning to form in the warm waters of the Caribbean, or that within days, the storm would force her to choose between the safety of her carefully constructed anonymity and the lives of people who would desperately need the skills she had spent years hiding. All she knew was that Director Ashford wanted to see her, and that meant her precious invisibility was about to be tested. Director Ashford's office felt like a shrine to aviation excellence. Model helicopters lined glass shelves, commendation plaques covered the walls, and photographs of dramatic rescues told the story of Coastal Emergency's most heroic moments. Olivia stood at attention in front of his mahogany desk, her hands clasped behind her back in a military posture that felt both natural and dangerous. Ashford barely looked up from the maintenance reports spread before him, his pen marking corrections with sharp, decisive strokes. "Your work is thorough," he said finally, his voice carrying the tone of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. "Perhaps too thorough for someone in your position." He looked up at her then, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "These technical recommendations you've included, they suggest a level of understanding that goes beyond basic maintenance training." Olivia kept her expression neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I believe in being comprehensive, sir. Safety is paramount in emergency operations, indeed." Ashford leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled as he continued his evaluation. Tell me, Miss Hartwell, what's your background in aviation? Your personnel file is rather sparse. The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Olivia had rehearsed this moment countless times, preparing for the day when someone might dig deeper into her carefully constructed civilian identity. I grew up around aircraft, sir. My father was a Navy pilot. I picked up some knowledge over the years. Picked up some knowledge, Ashford repeated, his tone suggesting he found her explanation inadequate. The modifications you suggested for our rotor maintenance schedule would require understanding of advanced aerodynamics. That's not something one simply picks up. Before Olivia could respond, Chief Anderson's voice crackled over the office. Intercom. Director, we've got a Coast Guard helicopter experiencing mechanical failure 20 miles offshore. They're requesting immediate assistance. Ashford's attention snapped away from her, his focus shifting to the emergency at hand. Get Stevens and Martinez airborne immediately. Full rescue configuration. He looked back at Olivia with dismissive finality. We'll continue this conversation later. Return to your duties. As Olivia walked back through the hangar, her mind reeled with the implications of Ashford's scrutiny. She had worked so hard to maintain her cover, to be competent enough to remain employed, but not so exceptional as to draw attention. The balance was delicate, and she could feel it beginning to shift in dangerous directions. The truth was that Captain Olivia Hartwell's military record had been anything but ordinary. Fresh out of the Air Force Academy, she had distinguished herself in helicopter rescue operations across 3 combat zones. Her unit, the 41st Rescue Squadron, had been deployed to Afghanistan, where she had flown some of the most dangerous missions of the war. While other pilots focused on standard evacuations, Olivia had specialized in deep penetration rescues, flying into hostile territory to extract wounded soldiers from impossible situations. Her reputation had been built on a legendary mission. During her second deployment, a special forces team had been pinned down in a valley surrounded by enemy fighters, their position too dangerous for conventional rescue attempts. The terrain was treacherous, the weather conditions marginal, and the tactical situation hopeless. 3 different rescue attempts had been turned back due to intense enemy fire. Command had written the team off as lost. Olivia had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Flying a modified Black Hawk alone, she had used the mountainous terrain to mask her approach, threading the helicopter through valleys so narrow that her rotor tips nearly scraped the canyon walls. When she reached the surrounded team, she had landed under heavy fire, maintaining position while wounded soldiers were loaded aboard. Her aircraft had taken multiple hits, hydraulic systems failing, but she had held steady until every man was aboard. The flight out had been even more harrowing. With damaged controls and an overloaded aircraft, she had navigated back through enemy territory while treating the most critically wounded soldier herself, performing emergency medical procedures with one hand while flying with the other. The mission had saved 7 lives and earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross, making her one of the youngest recipients in Air Force history. But success had brought unwanted attention. As one of the few female helicopter pilots in combat rescue operations, Olivia had become a symbol, used in recruitment videos and public relations campaigns, that made her uncomfortable. The military wanted to showcase her achievements, but the spotlight felt like exposure rather than recognition. She had preferred the quiet professionalism of her squadron, where her gender mattered less than her ability to bring people home alive. The end had come suddenly and without warning. During a routine training exercise at Fort Campbell, Olivia had been performing advanced maneuvers when another pilot, Captain Derek Morrison, had made a critical error in formation flying. His helicopter had strayed into her airspace during a complex rescue simulation, forcing her to take emergency evasive action to avoid a mid-air collision. The maneuver had been textbook perfect, exactly what any experienced pilot would have done in the same situation. But Morrison was the nephew of a 3-star general, and his career trajectory was considered more valuable than the truth. Within hours of the incident, Olivia found herself facing a board of inquiry composed entirely of male officers who seemed more interested in protecting Morrison than understanding what had actually happened. The official report blamed her for reckless flying and failure to maintain situational awareness, charges that were not only false but professionally devastating. The military justice system had ground her down methodically. Character witnesses who might have supported her were transferred or pressured to remain silent. Flight recorder data that would have exonerated her was deemed inconclusive by investigators who never bothered to interview her. Within 6 months, Captain Olivia Hartwell had been quietly forced to resign her commission, her military career destroyed by a system that preferred a convenient scapegoat to an inconvenient truth. The transition to civilian life had been brutal. Airlines were reluctant to hire pilots with contested military records, especially women whose dismissals raised questions about their competence. Flight instructor positions required recommendations that no one in her former chain of command was willing to provide. Slowly, inevitably, Olivia had been forced to accept that her flying career was over. The job at Coastal Emergency had been a lifeline, though a humble one. Working on aircraft without being allowed to fly them was a special kind of torture, but it kept her connected to aviation in some small way. More importantly, it allowed her to disappear completely, to become just another face in the crowd of civilian workers who kept emergency services operational. Standing in the hangar now, watching Stevens and Martinez power up their aircraft for the Coast Guard rescue, Olivia felt the familiar ache of watching others do what she was born to do. The rescue helicopter lifted off smoothly, its rotors biting into the humid Gulf air as it headed toward the emergency offshore. She knew she could have made that flight faster, more efficiently, with better decision-making under pressure. But knowledge without opportunity was just another form of imprisonment. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The storm is coming. Are you ready to fly again?" The message disappeared before she could screenshot it, leaving her staring at a blank screen and wondering if she had imagined the whole thing. But deep in her chest, something long dormant began to stir, as if the approaching hurricane was awakening more than just the wind. Hurricane Ophelia had strengthened overnight from a tropical depression to a Category 2 storm, and the National Weather Service was predicting further intensification as it moved through the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The morning briefing at Coastal Emergency Flight Operations carried an urgency that Olivia hadn't felt since her military days. Director Ashford stood before a wall-mounted weather display, his laser pointer tracing the storm's projected path with grim precision. Current models show Ophelia making landfall somewhere between Galveston and Houston in approximately 72 hours. He announced to the assembled pilots and support staff, wind speeds are expected to reach 140 miles per hour at landfall, with storm surge potentially exceeding 15 feet in some areas. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't going to be a routine tropical storm response. This was going to be a battle for survival. Olivia stood at the back of the briefing room, officially there to provide maintenance updates, but actually absorbing every detail of the operational planning. She watched as Ashford assigned his most experienced pilots to different sectors of the anticipated disaster zone. Marcus Webb would handle evacuations from the barrier islands. Stevens and Martinez would coordinate with the Coast Guard for offshore rescues. Thompson and Rodriguez would focus on urban search and rescue operations. What about the hospital evacuations? Asked Dr. Amanda Brooks, the emergency room director from Memorial Coast Hospital, who had joined the briefing via video conference. Her face on the large monitor showed the strain of someone trying to manage an impossible situation. "We have 47 patients who can't be moved by ground transport, including 12 in intensive care. If the storm surge reaches our facility..." "We'll handle it," Ashford interrupted. though his confidence seemed forced. "Our pilots are the best on the Gulf Coast. We'll get your people out safely." But Olivia could see the calculation behind. His eyes, the grim mathematics of aircraft capacity versus human need. Even working around the clock, a standard evacuation would require multiple trips per aircraft, and hurricane conditions would severely limit flight operations. As the briefing continued, Olivia found herself mentally solving the logistical challenges that Ashford's team was struggling with. The hospital evacuation could be accomplished more efficiently with a different approach, using the larger aircraft for mass casualty transport, while the smaller, more maneuverable helicopters handled the most critical patients who required life support during flight. The timing would be crucial, with flights beginning during the outer bands of the hurricane, when conditions were still manageable, rather than waiting until the storm forced emergency operations. "Sir," Marcus Webb raised his hand hesitantly, "what if conditions deteriorate faster than predicted? The weather models aren't always accurate, and if we get caught in, we follow protocols." Ashford cut him off sharply. "No unnecessary risks. Aircraft and crew safety are paramount. We can't help anyone if we lose helicopters to heroic gestures." His eyes swept the room, lingering meaningfully on each pilot. "This is not the time for individual initiative. Every flight will be authorized by me personally." After the briefing, Olivia lingered in the briefing room, studying the weather displays with the intensity of someone whose life had once depended on reading atmospheric conditions correctly. The storm's eye wall was tightening, a sign that Ophelia was about to undergo rapid intensification. The projected path had also shifted slightly eastward, which would bring the worst conditions directly over Galveston and the surrounding coastal areas. "Impressive storm," a voice said behind her. She turned to find Chief Anderson watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You seem to know your way around weather patterns." "My father taught me to read storms," she replied carefully. "Growing up on the coast, you learn to respect the power of hurricanes." Anderson nodded slowly. "Your father was Navy, right? Must have been through a few of these himself." He paused, studying her face. "You know, we could use someone with weather expertise in the operations center during the emergency. Someone who understands the technical side but isn't needed in the cockpit." The offer was meant as a compliment, but it stung worse than any insult. To be relegated to weather observer while lives hung in the balance felt like another small death, another reminder of how far she had fallen from her true calling. "I appreciate the offer, Chief, but I'm more useful keeping the aircraft maintained." "Suit yourself," Anderson said, though his tone suggested he thought she was making a mistake. "But if you change your mind, the offer stands." As the day progressed, the atmosphere at Coastal Emergency became increasingly tense. Weather updates arrived hourly, each one confirming that Ophelia was strengthening faster than anyone had anticipated. By afternoon, the storm had reached Category 3 status, and the projected storm surge had been revised upward to potentially 20 feet in some areas. Olivia threw herself into aircraft maintenance with desperate intensity, checking and double-checking every system that might be called upon during the emergency operations. She found herself paying particular attention to the older aircraft in the fleet, the helicopters that would likely be pressed into service despite their marginal condition. One in particular, a 20-year-old rescue helicopter designated N347EM, showed signs of hydraulic system wear that concerned her. She was documenting her findings when she overheard a conversation between Marcus Webb and another pilot near the part storage area. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Marcus was saying, his voice tight with anxiety. "Flying in hurricane conditions. That's not what I signed up for." "Nobody's ready for this," the other pilot replied. "But Ashford's right, we follow protocols and don't take unnecessary risks. Better to lose some equipment and lose pilots." Olivia wanted to tell them that the greatest risk would be hesitation, that in emergency conditions, aggressive action was often the safest course. She wanted to share the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had flown rescue missions in combat zones, where the difference between success and failure was often measured in seconds of decision-making time. But she remained silent, just another ground crew member who wasn't qualified to offer opinions on flight operations. As evening approached, Olivia found herself standing outside the hangar, watching the horizon where the first high clouds of Ophelia's outer bands were beginning to appear. The air had that peculiar stillness that preceded major storms, a false calm that experienced weather watchers knew was more ominous than obvious signs of approaching violence. Her phone buzzed again, with another message from the unknown number. Tomorrow changes everything. The sky remembers who you are, even if they don't. This time the message stayed long enough for her to read it twice before disappearing, leaving her with more questions than answers. Director Ashford emerged from the facility, his expression grim as he surveyed the approaching storm clouds. He noticed Olivia, standing nearby, and walked over with the purposeful stride of a man accustomed to being in control of every situation. "Nervous about the storm?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was more interested in testing her reaction than offering comfort. "Concerned," she replied honestly. "Ophelia's developing faster than the models predicted. The emergency evacuations are going to be challenging." Ashford studied her with renewed interest. "You seem quite knowledgeable about storm behavior." "Perhaps. Chief Anderson was right about utilizing your expertise in the operations center." Before Olivia could respond, Marcus Webb approached them with obvious urgency. "Director, we just got word from the hospital. Dr. Brooks says they need to start evacuating the critical patients earlier than planned. The storm surge modeling shows their facility could be underwater 12 hours sooner than originally predicted." Ashford's face darkened. "That changes everything. We'll need to begin evacuation flights during the storm's approach, possibly in conditions that exceed our normal operational parameters." He looked directly at Olivia then, his gray eyes calculating. "Miss Hartwell, report to the operations center tomorrow at 0600. It appears we're going to need all the weather expertise we can get." As she watched Ashford and Marcus walk back toward the facility, deep in urgent conversation about revised flight schedules and risk assessments, Olivia felt the familiar stirring of purpose that she had thought was buried forever. Hurricane. Ophelia was coming, and with it, the kind of challenge that would test every pilot's skill and courage. She just prayed that when the moment came, the men who would be flying into the storm would prove equal to the task, because if they weren't, people were going to die. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos as Hurricane Ophelia, now a Category 4 storm, bore down on the Texas coast with unprecedented fury. Olivia sat at a corner workstation, surrounded by weather monitoring equipment and communication arrays that painted a real-time picture of the approaching disaster. The storm had defied every prediction, intensifying faster than any hurricane in recorded Gulf Coast history. Wind speeds had reached 155 miles per hour, just shy of Category 5 status, and the storm surge predictions had been revised upward to a catastrophic 25 feet in some areas. Director Ashford paced behind the flight coordinators, his usual composure beginning to crack under the pressure of managing an operation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. The hospital evacuation that should have been routine had become a nightmare scenario. Memorial Coast Hospital was now directly in Ophelia's path, and Dr. Amanda Brooks had made increasingly desperate calls throughout the morning as conditions around the facility deteriorated rapidly. "We need those patients moved now." Dr. Brooks' voice crackled over the communication system, barely audible above the howling wind that was already battering the hospital. "The lower floors are starting to flood, and we've lost power to 2 of our life support systems. I've got 12 critical patients who won't survive another hour without evacuation." Marcus Webb stood before the weather displays, his face pale as he studied the storm data. The flight conditions were deteriorating by the hour, with sustained Winds approaching the absolute limits of safe helicopter operations. "Sir," he said to Ashford, his voice tight with anxiety, "the wind speeds are exceeding our operational parameters. Even our most experienced pilots. I don't want to hear about limitations." Ashford snapped, though his own concern was evident. "Those people are counting on us. We're the only emergency service with aircraft capable of reaching them." Olivia had been monitoring the weather data for hours, and she could see what the others were missing. There was a brief window of opportunity developing, a temporary weakening in the storms, outer bands that would allow for limited flight operations. But the window would only last about 40 minutes, and it would require precision timing and expert navigation to exploit it effectively. "Director," she said, standing up from her workstation, "there's a gap in the storm structure developing northeast of the hospital. If timed correctly, a skilled pilot could—" "Miss Hartwell," Ashford interrupted, his tone sharp with irritation. "You're here to monitor weather data, not provide flight recommendations. Leave the operational decisions to qualified personnel." The dismissal stung, but Olivia persisted. "Sir, with respect, this window won't last long. The meteorological data shows I said enough." Ashford's voice carried across the operations center, drawing the attention of everyone present. "You're a ground crew member, not a pilot. Your job is to read instruments, not interpret tactical flying conditions." The room fell silent, with all eyes on the confrontation. Marcus Webb shifted uncomfortably, while the other pilots exchanged glances that mixed embarrassment with agreement. Chief Anderson looked like he wanted to intervene but remained silent, clearly reluctant to challenge Ashford's authority during a crisis. Before the awkward moment could pass, the operations center door burst open and a local television news crew entered. Led by reporter Jennifer Hayes from Channel 12 News, Ashford had apparently agreed to allow media coverage of the rescue operation, confident that it would showcase Coastal Emergency's capabilities during the storm response. "Director Ashford," Hayes said, approaching with her cameraman in tow, "we're here to document the heroic efforts of your pilots during this unprecedented storm. Can you tell our viewers about the challenges you're facing?" Ashford's demeanor immediately shifted to his public relations persona, the polished professional who had built his reputation on successful high-profile rescues. "Our pilots are the finest emergency aviation professionals on the Gulf Coast," he began, his voice carrying the confidence that had made him a media favorite. "They're trained to operate in conditions that would ground lesser aviators. What about reports that some of your personnel are questioning the safety of these missions?" Hayes pressed, her journalist instincts detecting the tension in the room. Ashford's eyes flicked to Olivia, then back to the camera. "There are always those who prefer caution over courage. Emergency aviation requires a special kind of person, someone with the training, experience, and frankly, the natural ability to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure." He paused for effect. "Not everyone has what it takes to be a rescue pilot. Some people are better suited to support roles." The implication was clear, and Olivia felt her cheeks burn as she realized Ashford was using her earlier comments to demonstrate his point about qualified versus unqualified personnel. The camera had captured the entire exchange, including her visible reaction to his dismissive words. "Can you elaborate on that?" Hayes asked, sensing a story developing. "Well," Ashford said, warming to his theme, "we have support staff who sometimes think they understand flight operations better than our trained pilots. But there's a reason why certain people fly and others don't. It takes years of training and a particular kind of temperament to handle emergency rescues." He gestured toward Olivia without naming her directly. "Some people wash out of pilot training for good reasons. The sky doesn't care about good intentions, it only respects competence." Marcus Webb looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that Ashford was taking the confrontation too far. But the director continued, emboldened by the camera's presence and his position of authority. The reality is that emergency aviation is still very much a field where traditional gender roles apply, Ashford said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. The physical and mental demands of flying rescue helicopters in extreme conditions require attributes that are, frankly, more common in male pilots. It's not politically correct to say, but experience has proven that women often struggle with the split-second decision-making and physical demands that define successful emergency aviators. The statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jennifer. Hayes' eyebrows raised as she recognized the significance of what had just been said on camera. Several of the male pilots shifted uncomfortably while Olivia stood frozen, realizing that Ashford had just publicly questioned her competence and used her as an example of female inadequacy in aviation. Are you saying women aren't capable of being rescue pilots? Hayes asked, her professional instincts fully engaged. I'm saying this woman couldn't handle the demands of emergency flying, Ashford replied, now gesturing directly at Olivia. Miss Hartwell here was apparently dismissed from military flight training for performance issues. She's better suited to her current role, supporting those who actually have the skills to save lives. The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs as Ashford's comments crossed the line from professional criticism to personal attack. Olivia felt the walls closing in around her as her carefully constructed anonymity crumbled on live television. The secret she had guarded for years was being twisted into a public demonstration of female inadequacy in aviation. I think we have enough footage, Chief Anderson said firmly, stepping forward to end the media circus. But the damage was done. Jennifer Hayes and her cameraman had captured every moment of the confrontation, including Ashford's inflammatory comments about women in aviation and his specific dismissal of Olivia's qualifications. As the news crew was escorted out, Dr. Brooks' voice crackled over the radio again, more desperate than before. Coastal emergency. This is Memorial Coast Hospital. We have a complete power failure and rising water in our critical care unit. If you can't get here soon, we're going to lose patients. Ashford turned back to his pilots, his confidence shaken by the confrontation, but his authority still absolute. Webb, you'll take the lead aircraft. Follow standard approach procedures and don't take unnecessary risks. But even as he gave the orders, Olivia could see the doubt in his eyes. The window of opportunity she had identified was closing, and the standard procedures he insisted upon would likely result in mission failure. As Marcus, Webb and the other pilots prepared for what everyone knew was an extremely dangerous mission. Olivia retreated to her workstation, her mind reeling from the public humiliation she had just endured. The storm was intensifying, the rescue window was closing, and lives hung in the balance while she had been reduced to a cautionary tale about women who didn't belong in the cockpit. But deep inside, Captain Olivia Hartwell was stirring to life, and she was very, very angry. The Channel 12 news segment aired that evening, just as Hurricane Ophelia made landfall with devastating fury. While the storm battered the Texas coast with record-breaking winds and surge, a different kind of storm was unleashing itself across social media and news networks. Jennifer Hayes had edited the footage expertly, creating a narrative that painted Olivia as the poster child for failed female integration in emergency services. Local emergency aviation director questions women's capabilities, read the headline that appeared across multiple news outlets within hours of the broadcast. The clip of Ashford's comments went viral almost immediately, with the footage of Olivia's humiliated reaction shared thousands of times across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. #WomenCan'tFly began trending, accompanied by countless memes and commentary. That reduced her life's work to a punchline. Olivia watched the coverage from her apartment, which had lost power hours earlier as Ophelia's winds reached their peak intensity. Her phone, running on backup battery, buzzed constantly with notifications as her name spread across the internet like wildfire. The comments were brutal and personal, attacking not just her qualifications, but her appearance, her character, and her right to exist in aviation spaces. Maybe she should stick to serving coffee to the real pilots, read one comment that had received over 500 likes. Another diversity hire proving why standards matter more than politics, added another. The most painful ones came from people claiming military backgrounds, questioning her service record and suggesting she had been given opportunities she didn't deserve simply because of her gender. By morning, as the hurricane's winds finally began to subside, the professional consequences were already mounting. Chief Anderson called her before dawn, his voice heavy with regret and resignation. "Olivia, I'm sorry, but I have to place you on administrative leave pending an investigation." The phone hasn't stopped ringing with complaints from donors, board members, and other emergency services organizations. They're questioning your qualifications and demanding answers about your hiring. "Chief, you know my work quality," she began, but Anderson cut her off gently. "This isn't about your technical skills. It's about public perception and organizational credibility. Ashford is demanding a complete review of your background, and the board is asking questions I can't answer." There was a long pause. "Take some time, let this blow over. Maybe in a few months when people forget." But Olivia knew that the internet never forgot, and neither did the aviation community. After hanging up, she sat in her powerless apartment, watching through her window as emergency crews worked to clear debris from the storm. The irony wasn't lost on her while she sat unemployed and disgraced. Real rescue operations were happening outside her window, operations that could have benefited from her expertise. The grocery store trip that afternoon became an exercise in public humiliation. 3 different people recognized her from the viral video, including a teenage cashier who loudly announced to his coworkers, "Hey, that's the lady who thinks she can fly helicopters." The laughter that followed was sharp and cutting, reducing years of training and service to a moment of ridicule. At the gas station, a man in his 50s wearing a veteran's cap approached her aggressively. "I saw you on the news," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from other customers. "Women like you are destroying the military. My son earned his wings the hard way, without diversity quotas and political correctness." When Olivia tried to explain that she was also a veteran, he laughed dismissively. "Sure you are, sweetheart. Let me guess, you flew a desk." The attacks weren't limited to strangers. Her landlord, Mrs. Patterson, left a voicemail expressing concern about the negative attention Olivia's presence might bring to the apartment complex. 2 of her neighbors had complained about reporters knocking on doors, and the property management company was reviewing the situation. The message was clear: find somewhere else to live. Even worse was the email from her father's old squadron reunion committee. "Given recent developments and the questions surrounding your service record, we feel it would be inappropriate for you to attend this year's memorial service for your father. We're sure you understand that we must maintain the dignity and honor of those who served with distinction." The words hit like physical blows, turning her father's legacy into another casualty of her public disgrace. 3 days after the broadcast, Olivia received a certified letter from a law firm representing Director Ashford and Coastal Emergency Flight Operations. They were threatening legal action for defamation by implication and interference with emergency operations during a natural disaster. The letter claimed that her inappropriate attempts to provide flight guidance during the hurricane response had created a hostile work environment and undermined the authority of qualified personnel. The legal fees alone would bankrupt her, even if she had a case to fight. The message was clear: remain silent, accept responsibility for the humiliation, and disappear quietly. The letter included a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent her from discussing her employment or the circumstances of her departure. In exchange for dropping the threatened lawsuit, her savings, already depleted by months of reduced hours and now complete unemployment, wouldn't last more than a few weeks. The aviation industry was small and interconnected word of her performance issues, and disruptive behavior had already spread through professional networks, poisoning any chance of finding work in her field. Even positions requiring basic mechanical certification were being denied after background checks revealed her connection to the viral video. The psychological toll was even more devastating than the financial consequences. Olivia found herself reliving the moment of public humiliation obsessively, wondering what she could have said or done differently. The confident young officer who had once flown into combat zones without hesitation was being replaced by someone who questioned her own memories and achievements. Late at night, she would sit with her father's box of military memorabilia, staring at the Distinguished Flying Cross and wondering if she had imagined her own competence. The metal felt heavy and foreign in her hands, like an artifact from someone else's life. Had she really performed those rescue missions, or had the military created a fiction to support diversity initiatives? The doubt was poisonous, corroding her sense of self from the inside. Her phone rang constantly with reporters seeking additional comments, YouTube creators wanting to interview her for content about woke aviation culture, and social media influencers offering to help her tell her side of the story in exchange for exclusive access. She ignored them all, recognizing that any response would only feed the controversy and extend her public humiliation. The final blow came in the form of an email from Dr. Amanda Brooks at Memorial Coast Hospital. I wanted to reach out personally to thank the pilots who risked their lives to evacuate our patients during Hurricane Ophelia. While the media has focused on controversy, I want you to know that Marcus Webb and his team performed admirably under impossible conditions. Despite some initial challenges with weather timing, they successfully evacuated all 47 patients without a single casualty. Their professionalism and skill exemplify the best of emergency aviation services. The email was meant as a general thank you, but to Olivia, it felt like confirmation that her insights during the storm response had been not just dismissed, but proven unnecessary. The rescue had succeeded without her input, validating Ashford's position that she was irrelevant to actual emergency operations. The doubt that had been gnawing at her crystallized into certainty. Perhaps everyone was right, and she truly didn't belong in the cockpit. That night, Olivia sat at her kitchen table with a laptop open to apartment rental listings in Missouri and Kentucky, places where the cost of living was low and no one would recognize her face. She had $2,847 in her checking account, enough for a security deposit and first month's rent somewhere far from aviation, somewhere she could disappear completely and start over in a field that didn't require the sky dot as she scrolled through listings. For small towns where she could afford to rebuild her life. Her phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. The storm revealed more than just flooding. Some truths refused to stay buried. Tomorrow you learn why you were really grounded. This time the message didn't disappear, and when Olivia tried to reply, she received an automated response. This number is no longer in service. She stared at the cryptic message, wondering if her humiliation had finally driven her to paranoid delusion. But something in those words stirred a flicker of the woman she used to be, the pilot who had never backed down from a challenge, even when the odds seemed impossible. Hurricane Ophelia's aftermath painted Galveston in shades of destruction that would take months to repair. 5 days after landfall, emergency crews were still working around the clock to restore power, clear debris, and assess the full scope of the damage. The storm had been worse than anyone predicted, a Category 5 hurricane that had maintained its intensity right up to landfall, devastating everything in its path with winds that peaked at 180 miles per hour. Olivia sat in her darkened apartment, watching the recovery efforts through her window while nursing her third cup of instant coffee. The power had been restored to her building that morning, but she hadn't bothered to turn on the lights or television. The outside world felt distant and irrelevant, separated from her by the thick wall of shame and professional destruction that now defined her existence. Her phone had been mercifully quiet for the past day, the news cycle having moved on to covering the storm's unprecedented destruction and the heroic efforts of first responders. The viral video of her humiliation had been replaced by more immediate stories of rescue and recovery, relegating her public disgrace to the status of forgotten internet drama. She was researching one-bedroom apartments in Topeka, Kansas, a place where hurricanes were rare and aviation jobs were even rarer, when her phone rang with an unknown number displaying a 719 area code, Colorado Springs. Her heart skipped a beat, recognizing the area code for Peterson Air Force Base and the surrounding military installations. "Olivia Hartwell," she answered cautiously. "Captain Hartwell, this is Colonel Nicole Foster, Deputy Commander of the 341st Training Squadron at Randolph Air Force Base." The voice was crisp, professional, and carried an authority that cut through Olivia's mental fog like a blade. "I need to speak with you immediately regarding recent developments in your case." "Ma'am, I'm not a captain anymore," Olivia replied automatically, though something in Foster's tone made her sit up straighter. "I was discharged from service 6 years ago." "According to the corrected records I'm looking at, Captain, you were never legally discharged. Your separation was processed under fraudulent circumstances that have only recently come to light." There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. "Captain Hartwell, how quickly can you get to Randolph Air Force Base?" Olivia's mind reeled. "Fraudulent circumstances? Corrected records? Colonel, I don't understand. My discharge was processed through normal channels." "There was a board of inquiry. There was a cover-up," Foster interrupted, her voice hard with controlled anger. "And it's taken us 6 years to unravel it completely. The officer responsible for falsifying your records, and those of at least 7 other female pilots, has finally been exposed. Captain Derek Morrison's uncle, General Richard Morrison, used his influence to protect his nephew's career by systematically destroying the careers of pilots who posed a threat to his advancement." The name hit Olivia like a physical blow. Derek Morrison, the pilot whose mistake during training had nearly caused a mid-air collision, the mistake that had somehow become her fault in the official report. She had always suspected that his family connections had influenced the investigation, but she had never imagined the scope of the conspiracy. "The evidence is overwhelming," Foster continued. "Falsified flight recorder data, intimidated witnesses, altered training records, and direct orders from General Morrison to his subordinates to find grounds for your dismissal. The Inspector General's investigation has been ongoing for 2 years, triggered by a whistleblower who couldn't live with the cover-up any longer." Olivia's hands were shaking as she absorbed the implications. "Why now? Why are you calling me now?" "Because yesterday, Derek Morrison was arrested for causing a fatal helicopter crash in Afghanistan. He was flying under the influence of alcohol and killed 3 soldiers in his aircraft, plus 2 civilians on the ground. The military can no longer protect him, and the full scope of his father's corruption is coming to light." Foster's voice softened slightly. "Your name was at the top of the list of pilots whose careers were destroyed to protect Morrison's reputation. The Air Force wants to make this right." The apartment seemed to spin around Olivia as 6 years of suppressed rage and vindication crashed over her like a wave. Everything she had been told about her inadequacy, every doubt that had poisoned her confidence, every moment of shame and self-questioning, all of it had been built on lies designed to protect a privileged pilot who had never deserved to wear wings. "Ma'am," she said, her voice barely steady, "what exactly are you offering?" "Full reinstatement to your previous rank, retroactive pay and benefits, and immediate assignment to the 347th Rescue Wing at Moody Air Force Base," Foster replied without hesitation. "Additionally, the Air Force is prepared to issue public statements, correcting the record and acknowledging the injustice done to you and the other affected pilots." Olivia closed her eyes, feeling something that had been broken inside her beginning to heal. But the years of civilian humiliation and recent public disgrace had left their own scars. "Colonel, you should know that I've been in the news recently. There was an incident during Hurricane Ophelia where my qualifications were questioned publicly. My reputation in civilian aviation is damaged." Foster's laugh was sharp and knowing. "Captain, we've seen the video." Director Ashford's comments about women in aviation have been forwarded to every female pilot in the Air Force. Half the women at Randolph want to fly down to Galveston and have a conversation with him about gender roles in emergency services. But his point about my discharge, his point was based on fraudulent information, Foster interrupted. "The real question is whether you're ready to fly again. Because I have a mission that requires a pilot with your specific qualifications, and it needs to happen soon." Olivia's pulse quickened. "What kind of mission?" "Are you familiar with the Deepwater Horizon Memorial Flight Program?" Foster asked. "Every year, the Air Force conducts a ceremonial overflight of the Gulf of Mexico to honor the 11 workers who died in the oil rig explosion. This year's flight is scheduled for next week, and it will be conducted using our newest rescue helicopter, a modified HH-6OW combat rescue helicopter that represents the cutting edge of search and rescue technology." The significance wasn't lost on Olivia. The Deepwater Horizon Memorial Flight was one of the most prestigious assignments in rescue aviation, typically reserved for the most distinguished pilots in the Air Force. To be offered the mission as her re-entry flight was an honor beyond anything she had imagined possible. "The twist," Foster continued, "is that this year's flight will be conducted in cooperation with civilian emergency services as a demonstration of military-civilian coordination. In disaster response, representatives from emergency aviation services across the Gulf Coast will be observing, including officials from coastal emergency flight operations." Olivia felt a smile spreading across her face for the first time in days. "You want me to fly a demonstration mission in front of the people who just finished questioning my qualifications? I want you to remind everyone why you earned those wins in the first place," Foster replied. "The flight will be covered by regional media as part of the memorial coverage. It will be an opportunity to set the record straight, not just about your military service, but about women in aviation generally." As Olivia processed the offer, her phone buzzed with a text from another unknown number. 6 years of lies are about to be exposed. The sky has been waiting for you to come home." This message also disappeared immediately, but now she understood that someone had been orchestrating this revelation, guiding events toward this moment of redemption. "Colonel," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years, "when do I report for duty?" "There's a military transport leaving Ellington Field in Houston at 1400 hours today," Foster replied. "Pack light, we'll provide everything else you need, and Captain, welcome back to the Air Force." As Olivia ended the call, she walked to her closet and pulled out her father's old flight bag, the leather worn smooth by years of use, but still serviceable. For the first time since her public humiliation, she felt like herself again, not the broken civilian who had been hiding from her past, but Captain Olivia Hartwell, distinguished graduate of Air Force helicopter pilot training and recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross. Hurricane Ophelia had taken much from the Gulf Coast, but it had also washed away the lies that had kept her grounded. Now it was time to fly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio buzzed with the controlled energy of a premier military training facility. Captain Olivia Hartwell walked across the tarmac in a crisp new flight suit, her reinstated rank insignia gleaming in the Texas sun. After 6 years of civilian clothes and forced invisibility, wearing the uniform again felt like stepping back into her own skin. The familiar weight of the fabric, the precise placement of patches and badges, the unmistakable authority that came with earned military bearing, all of it combined to restore something essential that had been stolen from her. Colonel Foster's office was a study in professional efficiency, its walls lined with photographs of rescue operations and commendations for training excellence. But what captured Olivia's attention immediately was the extensive documentation spread across Foster's desk manila folders, computer printouts, and official reports that represented years of investigative work. Before we discuss your mission, parameters, Foster began, gesturing for Olivia to take a seat. I want you to understand the full scope of what was done to you and the other affected pilots. This wasn't just bureaucratic incompetence or institutional bias. This was a deliberate, systematic conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Air Force command. Foster opened the thickest folder and began laying out documents with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. General Richard Morrison wasn't just protecting his nephew, Derek, he was protecting an entire network of underperforming male pilots whose careers were advanced through family connections rather than merit. Your case was particularly threatening because your combat record was so exemplary that it made his nephew's mediocrity obvious by comparison. The first document was a copy of Olivia's original training evaluations, bearing scores that were dramatically different from the ones she had been shown during her dismissal proceedings, where she remembered failing marks and critical comments. The authentic records showed exceptional performance ratings and instructor recommendations for advanced training positions. Your initial flight instructor, Major Sarah Chun, fought the falsification of your records, Foster continued, sliding another document across the desk. She was transferred to a desk job in Alaska within a week of questioning the official version of your training incident. Her original report completely contradicted the narrative that was used to justify your discharge. Olivia read Major Chun's report with growing amazement. The instructor's account described Derek Morrison as fundamentally unsuited for formation flying and a danger to other pilots due to his inability to maintain spatial awareness under pressure. Her own performance during the controversial training exercise was characterized as textbook emergency response and exemplary airmanship under extreme conditions. The flight recorder data was the smoking gun, Foster said, producing a thick technical analysis report. The original recordings clearly showed that Morrison deviated from assigned flight parameters and entered your airspace without authorization. Your evasive maneuver prevented a catastrophic collision that would have resulted in multiple fatalities. The technical report included frame-by-frame analysis of radar data, radio communications, and aircraft telemetry that painted a picture completely opposite to the official narrative. Morrison had been flying erratically, ignoring radio calls, and approaching dangerous proximity to other aircraft when Olivia's emergency maneuver had saved both their lives. But the most damning evidence, Foster continued, her voice hardening with anger, was General Morrison's direct communication with the Board of Inquiry. She handed Olivia a classified memo that made her blood run cold. The document, marked Confidential Eyes Only, contained explicit instructions to find grounds for Captain Hartwell's dismissal regardless of factual evidence, and to ensure that Morrison family reputation remains intact. The memo went on to detail specific strategies for discrediting Olivia's character, questioning her emotional stability, and portraying her as an example of why women were unsuited for high-stress aviation roles. It was a blueprint for systematic character assassination, designed to destroy not just her career, but her credibility as a pilot and a person. General Morrison didn't act alone, Foster explained, producing additional documents. He had allies throughout the Air Force personnel system who helped fabricate records, intimidate witnesses, and ensure that appeals were denied. This network protected dozens of underqualified male pilots while destroying the careers of women and minorities who posed a threat to their advancement. Olivia studied Photographs of the other affected pilots, 7 women and 3 men whose careers had been ended through similar tactics. Some had been discharged for performance issues that didn't appear in their actual training records. Others had been forced out through harassment campaigns that made their continued service impossible. All of them had been exceptional pilots whose only crime was outperforming the general's protégés. The whistleblower who finally exposed this was Major Jennifer Park, Foster said, pointing to a photograph of an Asian American woman in pilot's dress uniform. She was one of Morrison's targets, but she kept detailed records of every irregularity she witnessed. When Derek Morrison killed those soldiers in Afghanistan, she couldn't stay silent anymore. Major Park's testimony, contained in a 200-page sworn statement, detailed years of systematic discrimination and record falsification. She had witnessed document alterations, heard explicit instructions to fail female candidates, and documented instances where male pilots with inferior performance were promoted over more qualified women. Her evidence had triggered the inspector general investigation that finally brought down the entire conspiracy. Derek Morrison is facing court-martial for negligent homicide and conduct unbecoming an officer, Foster continued. His father has been forced into early retirement and is under investigation for corruption and abuse of power. But more importantly, the Air Force is implementing systematic reforms to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. Olivia felt a complex mixture of vindication and rage as she absorbed the evidence of her destruction. Everything she had been told about her inadequacy, every doubt that had poisoned her confidence for 6 years, had been deliberately constructed to protect corrupt officials and their incompetent relatives. "There's something else you need to know," Foster said, her voice becoming more personal. "Your father was investigating irregularities in pilot training and promotion systems before his death. His final report, which was classified and buried, documented many of the same patterns that we've now confirmed. General Morrison saw your father as a threat and targeted you specifically because you were continuing his work." The revelation hit Olivia like a physical blow. Her father's death had been ruled accidental, a training flight that ended in mechanical failure. But the timing, coming just weeks before he was scheduled to present his findings to Air Force leadership, suddenly seemed suspicious. "We can't prove that your father's crash was anything other than mechanical failure," Foster said carefully, "but we can prove that his investigation was systematically suppressed and that his findings were used to target pilots like you who might have continued his work." Olivia stared at her father's photograph on Foster's desk, seeing him now not just as a loving parent, but as a crusader for justice, who had paid the ultimate price for challenging corruption. The knowledge that she had been targeted, partially because of his integrity, added another layer of meaning to her long exile from military service. "Tomorrow's memorial flight isn't just about your personal redemption," Foster concluded. "It's about honoring your father's legacy and proving that the Air Force is committed to merit-based advancement regardless of gender or family connections. The civilian officials who will be observing need to see what a real pilot looks like when she's flying the aircraft she was born to command." As Olivia left Foster's office with copies of her vindication, she felt the last remnants of doubt and shame falling away like discarded armor. She had spent 6 years questioning her own memories and abilities, wondering if perhaps her critics had been right about her limitations. Now she knew with absolute certainty that her skills had never been in question, only her willingness to remain silent about corruption. The HH-60W combat rescue helicopter waited for her in the hangar, its sleek lines representing the cutting edge of military aviation technology. Tomorrow she would fly this magnificent machine in front of the people who had spent the past week questioning whether women belonged in cockpits. She would show them exactly what Captain Olivia Hartwell could do when the lies were stripped away and the truth was finally allowed to soar. Dawn broke over Randolph Air Force Base with crystalline clarity. the kind of perfect weather that pilots dream of for important missions. Captain Olivia Hartwell stood in the hangar before the HH-6O combat rescue helicopter, her hands tracing the aircraft's pristine surfaces with the reverence of someone reuniting with a long-lost love. 6 years of forced separation from military aviation had made her forget just how magnificent these machines could be when built without compromise or budget constraints. The H-6OW represented everything she had missed during her exile in civilian aviation, where the older helicopters at Coastal Emergency had been workhorses built for functionality. This aircraft was a thoroughbred designed for the most demanding rescue operations imaginable. Its advanced flight controls responded to thought as much as touch. Its navigation systems could thread through any weather, and its rescue capabilities could snatch life from the jaws of certain death. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the lead maintenance technician, walked her through the aircraft's specifications with the pride of someone who understood that excellence in machinery often meant the difference between life and death in emergency operations. She's got a range of 500 nautical miles, Captain, with the ability to maintain hover stability in winds up to 65 knots. The rescue hoist can handle 600 pounds and operate in conditions that would ground most civilian aircraft. Olivia absorbed every technical detail, her mind automatically calculating performance parameters and operational possibilities. The aircraft's capabilities exceeded anything she had flown during her military service, representing years of technological advancement that had occurred during her forced absence from aviation. Learning these systems would normally require weeks of training, but tomorrow's memorial flight demanded that she master them overnight. The flight profile for tomorrow's mission is relatively straightforward, explained Major Lisa Park, the mission commander who would be coordinating with civilian authorities. You'll depart Randolph at 1,000 hours. Proceed to the Deepwater Horizon Memorial Site in the Gulf of Mexico. Conduct the ceremonial overflight, then return to Ellington Field, near Houston, where the civilian observers will be waiting. The mission briefing took place in a secure conference room, where classified weather data and flight plans covered multiple display screens. Major Park highlighted the route on a digital map, tracing a path that would take Olivia over some of the same waters where Hurricane Ophelia had wreaked havoc just days earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. This flight would demonstrate military precision and capability in the same region where civilian emergency services had struggled with the storm's challenges. The civilian observers include representatives from emergency aviation services across the Gulf Coast. Park continued, bringing up a list of attending organizations: Texas Department of Public Safety, Louisiana State Police Aviation, Florida Fish and Wildlife, and of course, Coastal Emergency Flight Operations from Galveston. Olivia's pulse quickened at the mention of her former employer. Director Ashford would be present to witness her vindication, along with the pilots who had watched her public humiliation just days earlier. The opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities in front of the people who had questioned her qualifications was both thrilling and terrifying. "What's the media coverage situation?" Olivia asked, knowing that tomorrow's flight would either restore her reputation or provide additional footage for her critics to exploit. "Full regional coverage," Park replied. The memorial flight always receives significant attention, and this year's focus on military-civilian cooperation has generated additional interest. Channel 12 News will be providing live coverage, including interviews with participating personnel. Before and after the mission, the mention of Channel 12 News sent a chill through Olivia. The same station that had broadcast her humiliation would now have the opportunity to document her redemption or capture her failure for a second round of public destruction. Jennifer Hayes, the reporter who had helped amplify Ashford's attacks on women in aviation, would likely be present to cover the story. The afternoon was spent in intensive aircraft familiarization, with Olivia working through every system and Emergency procedure until the HH6. Odler's controls felt like extensions of her own nervous system. The aircraft's fly-by-wire controls required a different touch than the mechanical system she remembered from her military service. But her hands adapted quickly to the subtle electronic responses. Flight instructor Colonel James Wright, a veteran rescue pilot with over 4,000 hours in combat operations, supervised her training with the critical eye of someone who understood that tomorrow's mission would be scrutinized by experts looking for any sign of inadequacy. "Your stick and rudder skills are solid," he observed after watching her execute a series of complex maneuvers in the simulator. But tomorrow isn't about basic flying. It's about demonstrating the kind of precision that separates exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. The psychological preparation was more challenging than the technical training. 6 years of civilian humiliation and systematic doubt had created mental barriers that didn't disappear, simply because her military status had been restored. During dinner at the Officers Club, Olivia found herself surrounded by active duty pilots who treated her with the respect due a fellow aviator, but she struggled to accept their easy confidence in her abilities. "Imposter syndrome is normal after what you've been through," observed Captain Maria Santos, a fellow rescue pilot who had read about Olivia's case in the Inspector General's report. "You've spent 6 years being told you're inadequate by people who were protecting their own corruption. It takes time to remember who you really are." That evening, Olivia stood on the flight line under a canopy of stars, watching other aircraft conduct night training operations. The familiar sounds of turbine engines and rotor blades filled her with a peace she hadn't felt since her discharge. This was where she belonged, not hidden in maintenance hangars or relegated to weather observation duties, but in command of sophisticated aircraft. During challenging missions, her phone buzzed with a final message from the mysterious number that had been guiding her journey. "Tomorrow you reclaim not just your own sky, but the sky for every woman who has been told she doesn't belong there. Your father would be proud." The message felt like a benediction, a reminder that tomorrow's flight carried meaning beyond personal vindication. Colonel Foster found her there an hour later, reviewing flight plans under the hangar lights. "Nervous?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Terrified," Olivia admitted honestly. "Not of flying, I know I can handle the aircraft and the mission, but of failing publicly again, of proving that maybe they were right about women in high performance." "Aviation." Foster's smile was understanding but firm. "Captain, I've reviewed your complete military record, the real one, not the fabricated version. You've flown rescue missions in conditions that would challenge any pilot, male or female. Tomorrow's memorial flight, even with all its symbolic importance, is less demanding than missions you've successfully completed dozens of times." As they walked back toward the officers' quarters, Foster shared one final piece of information. "Dr. Amanda Brooks from Memorial Coast Hospital specifically requested to observe tomorrow's demonstration. She wants to meet the pilot whose weather analysis could have improved the hurricane evacuation timeline. Apparently, your insights during the storm response were more valuable than Director Ashford was willing to admit." Olivia felt a surge of confidence that had been missing for years. Tomorrow's flight would be more than a memorial ceremony or a demonstration of military capabilities. It would be proof that excellence couldn't be suppressed forever, that truth had a way of rising above the lies designed to bury it. The HHOW waited in the hangar like a promise of redemption, its sleek form reflecting the runway lights that would guide her back to the sky where she belonged. 6 years of exile were about to end, and Captain Olivia Hartwell was ready to remind the world what she could do when given the aircraft and mission she deserved. The morning of the Deepwater Horizon Memorial flight dawned with deceptive tranquility. Captain Olivia Hartwell completed her pre-flight inspection of the HH-6O combat rescue helicopter with methodical precision, her hands moving across control surfaces and equipment with the muscle memory of someone born to fly. At Ellington Field, civilian observers were already gathering in the designated viewing area, including Director Ashford and several pilots from Coastal Emergency Flight Operations who had made the drive from Galveston to witness the demonstration. Olivia was conducting her final systems check when Major Park's voice crackled through her headset with urgent authority. "Captain Hartwell, we have a developing situation that's going to modify your mission parameters. A medical evacuation request has just come in from a research vessel in the Gulf of Mexico, approximately 40 nautical miles southeast of the memorial site." The change in mission scope sent adrenaline coursing through Olivia's system. Memorial flights were ceremonial and predictable, but real rescue operations required split-second decision-making and expert airmanship under pressure. "What's the nature of the emergency?" she asked, her training automatically shifting into combat rescue mode. "Research vessel Gulf Pioneer reports a crew member suffering from acute appendicitis with signs of rupture," Park replied. "The patient is Dr. Rebecca Stone, a marine biologist conducting post-hurricane ecosystem assessment. The vessel's medical facilities are inadequate for surgical intervention, and deteriorating weather conditions are preventing Coast Guard assets from reaching their position." Olivia checked her weather displays and felt her heart rate increase. A new tropical system was developing in the Gulf, bringing conditions that were rapidly approaching the limits of safe helicopter operations. Wind speeds were building toward 45 knots with gusts to 60, and wave heights were reaching 12 feet, challenging conditions, even for an advanced aircraft like the HH-60. "Sir, what's the status of Coast Guard rescue assets?" she asked, knowing that civilian medical evacuations typically fell under their jurisdiction rather than Air Force operations. "2 Coast Guard helicopters attempted the rescue earlier this morning," Park explained. "Both were forced to turn back due to mechanical issues exacerbated by the rough conditions. The Gulf Pioneer is anchored in the same waters where Hurricane Ophelia caused significant damage to offshore platforms, and debris in the water is creating additional hazards for sea-level operations." Colonel Foster's voice joined the communication channel with the authority of Mission Command. "Captain Hartwell, this is now a real-world rescue operation with life-or-death implications. The Memorial overflight will be incorporated into your return route, but saving Dr. Stone takes priority over ceremonial objectives. Are you prepared to execute a challenging medical evacuation in deteriorating weather conditions?" The question hung in the air like a test of everything Olivia had been working toward for 6 years. This was the moment she had dreamed of, a chance to prove her capabilities not in a controlled demonstration, but in the kind of high-stakes rescue operation that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. "Affirmative, Colonel. I'm ready to execute the mission." As Olivia lifted off from Randolph Air Force Base, she could see the civilian observers at Ellington Field watching through binoculars and telephoto lenses. Director Ashford stood prominently among them, his expression unreadable but his attention focused entirely on her aircraft. Channel 12 News had positioned cameras to capture both the takeoff and eventual return, expecting to document a routine memorial flight rather than a life-saving rescue operation. The flight to the Gulf Pioneer's position took her directly over the areas most devastated by Hurricane Ophelia. From 2,000 feet, the storm's aftermath was clearly visible: damaged offshore platforms, debris fields floating in the dark water, and the churning seas that marked the beginning of the new tropical system. The weather was deteriorating faster than forecasted, with visibility dropping and wind speeds increasing beyond what most civilian aircraft could safely handle. "Gulf Pioneer, this is Air Force Rescue 347, Olivia transmitted as the research vessel came into view. "I have you visual and am beginning my approach. Be advised that conditions are marginal for hoist operations. I'll need your crew to follow my instructions precisely." The vessel below was pitching heavily in 15-foot seas, its deck equipment secured, but the superstructure rolling through angles that would make a helicopter approach extremely hazardous. Dr. Stone was visible on the aft deck, strapped to a rescue basket, but clearly in severe distress from her medical condition. Olivia positioned the HH-6OW in a hover, 100 feet above the vessel, fighting wind gusts that tried to push her aircraft toward the ship's antenna array. The helicopter's advanced flight controls helped maintain stability, but the rescue required the kind of precision flying that could only come from years of experience in high-stress situations. "Rescue basket is going down," she announced, beginning the delicate process of lowering the hoist while maintaining perfect position relative to the moving vessel. The Gulf Pioneer's deck was rising and falling 20 feet with each wave, requiring her to time the pickup with mathematical precision to avoid slamming the rescue equipment into the ship's structure. Below, the vessel's crew worked with practiced efficiency to secure Dr. Stone in the rescue basket, but Olivia could see through her aircraft's advanced optics that the patient was deteriorating rapidly. Time was running out, and the weather was getting worse by the minute. The hoist operation took 12 minutes of the most demanding flying Olivia had performed since her combat deployments. Every gust of wind required immediate correction. Every movement of the vessel demanded split-second adjustment of her hover position. When Dr. Stone finally reached the aircraft and was pulled inside by the flight medic, Olivia felt the satisfaction of a mission accomplished under the most challenging conditions possible. "Patient is aboard and stable," reported the flight medic, "but she needs surgical intervention within the hour. Recommend immediate transport to Memorial Coast Hospital. They have the best trauma facilities on the Gulf Coast." The return flight to Memorial Coast Hospital required Olivia to navigate through worsening weather while maintaining the smooth flight profile necessary for a critically ill patient. As she approached the Texas coast, she could see the media helicopters that had been dispatched to cover her return. Not knowing that the routine Memorial flight had become a dramatic rescue operation, at Memorial Coast Hospital's helipad, Dr. Amanda Brooks waited with a full surgical team, her expression mixing professional focus with obvious curiosity about the pilot, who had executed such a challenging evacuation. As the medical team rushed Dr. Stone toward the operating room, Brooks approached Olivia with something approaching awe. "Captain Hartwell," she said, extending her hand, "that was some of the finest emergency flying I've ever witnessed. The conditions out there would have defeated most pilots, but you made it look routine." The compliment meant more to Olivia than any medal or commendation could have. This was validation from someone who understood the stakes of emergency operations, who had seen firsthand what happened when rescue attempts failed. "Thank you, doctor. How's your patient?" "She live, thanks to you," Brooks replied simply. "Another hour, and we would have lost her." As Olivia prepared to depart for the delayed Memorial overflight, she realized that this rescue had accomplished something more important than personal vindication. She had saved a life using skills that had been dismissed as inadequate in conditions that had grounded other rescue assets, flying an aircraft that she had been told she wasn't qualified to command. The Memorial flight that followed was anticlimactic by comparison, though no less meaningful. As she conducted the ceremonial overflight of the Deepwater Horizon site, Olivia felt connected not just to the 11 workers who had died in that tragedy, but to her father and all the other aviators who had dedicated their lives to bringing people home safely. When she landed at Ellington Field, the civilian observers who had gathered to watch a routine demonstration found themselves witnesses to something far more significant. A consternation found themselves witnesses to something far more significant. Reminder that true aviation excellence transcended gender, politics, and institutional prejudice. Director Ashford stood among them, his expression unreadable, but his silence speaking volumes about what he had just witnessed. The tarmac at Ellington Field buzzed with an energy that Captain Olivia Hartwell had never experienced. The electricity of undeniable triumph, witnessed by those who had doubted her capabilities. As she shut down the HH-6OW's engines and completed her post-flight procedures, she could see through the cockpit windows that the crowd of civilian observers had grown substantially. Word of the dramatic rescue operation had spread, and additional emergency services personnel had arrived to witness the conclusion of what had become far more than a routine memorial flight. Director Graham Ashford stood at the front of the assembled group, his usual commanding presence diminished by the undeniable evidence of what he had just witnessed. The man who had publicly questioned women's capabilities in emergency aviation had watched one of those women execute a rescue operation that had defeated Coast Guard assets and challenged the limits of helicopter performance. His face displayed a complex mixture of professional recognition and personal discomfort as Olivia approached the gathering. Jennifer Hayes from Channel 12 News positioned herself strategically with her camera crew, clearly understanding that she was about to capture a very different story than the one she had broadcast just days earlier. The reporter who had amplified Ashford's dismissive comments about female pilots now found herself documenting the vindication of everything those comments had dismissed. Captain Hartwell, Dr. Amanda Brooks stepped forward as Olivia reached the group, her voice carrying genuine emotion. "I just received word from the surgical team. Dr. Stone is stable and expected to make a full recovery. The surgeon said another 30 minutes would have been too late. Your rescue literally saved her life." The announcement rippled through the assembled observers with the impact of irrefutable fact. This hadn't been a demonstration or training exercise. It had been a real rescue operation, executed under conditions that had grounded other aircraft, performed by a pilot whose qualifications had been publicly questioned. Just days earlier, Colonel Foster stepped forward to address the gathered civilian officials. "What you've witnessed today represents the kind of aviation excellence that the Air Force expects from all our rescue pilots, regardless of gender." Captain Hartwell's performance under challenging conditions exemplifies the professional standards that define military emergency operations. Marcus Webb, one of the coastal emergency pilots who had been present during Olivia's public humiliation, approached her with obvious discomfort. "Captain, I owe you an apology. After seeing what you just accomplished out there, I should have spoken up when Director Ashford made those comments about women in aviation. That was wrong, and I knew it at the time." His admission carried weight beyond personal recognition. It represented the kind of professional acknowledgement that Olivia had been denied for years. Other civilian pilots nodded in agreement, their expressions showing the respect that came from witnessing genuine expertise under pressure. Jennifer Hayes approached with her microphone, her professional instincts recognizing the dramatic reversal that was unfolding. "Captain Hartwell, just last week you were subjected to public criticism about women's capabilities in emergency aviation. How does it feel to have proven those critics wrong in such a dramatic fashion?" Olivia considered her response carefully, understanding that her words would likely receive the same wide distribution as Ashford's earlier attacks. "I didn't set out to prove anyone wrong," she said, her voice steady and professional. "I set out to save Dr. Stone's life using the skills I was trained to employ. The rescue succeeded because of preparation, experience, and the support of an exceptional aircraft and team, not because of any desire to make a point about gender in aviation." The measured response demonstrated the kind of professional maturity that contrasted sharply with Ashford's inflammatory rhetoric from the previous week. Several observers nodded approvingly at her focus on mission accomplishment rather than personal vindication. Director Ashford finally stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching humility. "Captain Hartwell, I want to publicly acknowledge that your performance today was exceptional by any standard. The rescue operation you executed would have challenged our most experienced pilots, and you made it look routine. He paused, clearly struggling with the words. I also want to apologize for my comments last week. They were unprofessional and reflected poorly on the principles that should guide emergency aviation services. The apology was grudging and incomplete, but it represented a public reversal that would be captured on camera and broadcast across the same networks that had spread his original attacks. For Olivia, it was less important than the recognition. From fellow aviators who understood what they had witnessed, Chief Paul Anderson approached her with obvious emotion. Olivia, I made a mistake placing you on administrative leave. Your technical knowledge and weather expertise could have improved our hurricane response operations. I'd like to discuss bringing you back to coastal emergency in a position that better utilizes your qualifications. The offer represented professional rehabilitation, but Olivia found herself less interested in returning to civilian aviation than in continuing the military career that had been stolen from her. I appreciate the offer, Chief, but I think my place is back in Air Force rescue operations. This is where I belong. Colonel Foster smiled at her response. The Air Force agrees. Captain Hartwell, you're being assigned to the 347th Rescue Wing at Moody Air Force Base as senior pilot for high-risk operations. Your experience with challenging rescues makes you ideal for missions that require exceptional airmanship. The assignment represented everything Olivia had lost 6 years earlier: respect, challenging missions, and the opportunity to use her skills to save lives. More importantly, it validated her father's belief that excellence would ultimately be recognized, regardless of the obstacles placed in its path. As the formal debriefing concluded, Dr. Brooks pulled Olivia aside for a private conversation. I wanted you to know that your weather analysis during Hurricane Ophelia was discussed extensively in our emergency planning committee. Your insights about timing evacuation flights could have saved hours in our patient transport operations. We've incorporated your recommendations into our disaster response protocols. The recognition that her technical knowledge had value beyond her flying skills meant more to Olivia than any official commendation. It validated years of study and observation that had been dismissed as presumptuous overreach by someone unqualified to offer professional opinions. As the crowd began to disperse, Jennifer Hayes approached for a final comment. Captain, what message do you have for other women who might be facing discrimination in aviation or other male-dominated fields? Olivia thought of Major Jennifer Park, whose courage in exposing corruption had made this moment possible, and of all the other female pilots whose careers had been destroyed by systematic discrimination. Excellence speaks for itself, she said simply. Focus on developing your skills, maintaining your standards, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong where your abilities have earned you the right to be. The message would resonate far beyond aviation, but for now, it was enough to know that she had reclaimed not just her own career, but also validated every woman who had been told she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough to excel in demanding fields. As the HH-6 OW was prepared for its return flight to Randolph Air Force Base, Olivia stood on the tarmac where her vindication had played out in front of those who had doubted her. The aircraft that had carried her back to the sky waited like a promise that the best of her career still lay ahead, that the lessons learned from humiliation and exile would make her a better pilot and a stronger leader. 6 years of imposed silence were finally over, and Captain Olivia Hartwell was ready to fly. 1 year later, Colonel Olivia Hartwell stood at the podium in the main auditorium at Moody Air Force Base, looking out at an audience of 200 pilot candidates representing the most diverse class in Air Force rescue training history. 47% of the assembled aviators were women, a dramatic increase from the single-digit percentages that had characterized military aviation for decades. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but the systematic reforms triggered by the Inspector General's investigation had created opportunities that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. Excellence in aviation isn't determined by gender, family connections, or political considerations. Olivia began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had proven her words through action rather than rhetoric. It's measured by your ability to bring people home safely when the conditions are impossible and the stakes are life or death. Every pilot in this room, regardless of background, has earned the right to be here through demonstrated competence and unwavering commitment to the mission. The audience included several faces that had become familiar to Olivia over the past year. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, whose application had been rejected 3 times before the new selection protocols gave her a fair evaluation, sat in the front row, with the confident bearing of someone who had topped her flight training class. Captain Michael Torres, one of the male pilots who had been unfairly advanced under the old system, but had voluntarily repeated training to meet actual standards, nodded approvingly from the middle section. The transformation of Air Force rescue operations had been comprehensive and measurable. Under Olivia's leadership as Director of Advanced Rescue Training, the 347th Rescue Wing had shattered multiple performance records while maintaining the lowest accident rate in the command's history. More importantly, the unit's rescue success rate had improved by 23% as diverse perspectives and rigorous merit-based selection had elevated the overall quality of personnel. The statistics tell part of the story, Olivia continued, gesturing to a display screen showing rescue operation data. In the past year, this wing has completed 347 successful rescue missions, including 89 operations that were classified as extremely high risk. Our success rate of 97.8% represents the highest performance level in Air Force rescue history, achieved by pilots who represent the most diverse and rigorously selected group of aviators ever assembled. The numbers weren't just statistics. They represented lives saved by aviators who had been given opportunities based on merit rather than connections. Dr. Rebecca Stone, the marine biologist whose life Olivia had saved during Hurricane Ophelia's aftermath, had become a vocal advocate for excellence-based selection in emergency services. Her research on post-hurricane ecosystem recovery had been enabled by Olivia's rescue, creating scientific knowledge that would help protect coastal environments for generations. Director Graham Ashford sat in the VIP section, his presence representing one of the more surprising developments of the past year. Following his public apology and recognition of Olivia's capabilities, he had requested assignment to the Air Force as a civilian consultant on military-civilian emergency coordination. His expertise in civilian aviation operations, combined with his hard-learned understanding of unconscious bias, had made him valuable in developing joint training programs. The changes we've implemented extend far beyond our own organization, Olivia explained to the assembled candidates. Civilian emergency services across the Gulf Coast have adopted new selection and training protocols based on the principles we've proven here. Merit-based advancement and objective performance standards are transforming the entire emergency aviation community. The ripple effects of the Inspector General's investigation had spread throughout military and civilian aviation. General Richard Morrison's forced retirement and Derek Morrison's court-martial conviction had sent shockwaves through the traditional network of family connections and institutional favoritism. 7 other female pilots had been reinstated with full retroactive benefits, and dozens of discrimination cases had been reopened for review. Major Jennifer Park, the whistleblower whose courage had exposed the systematic corruption, now served as Olivia's deputy director and had been selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel ahead of schedule. Her integrity and willingness to challenge institutional wrongdoing had been rewarded with career advancement and widespread recognition as a leader in military justice reform. Tomorrow, many of you will begin advanced rescue helicopter training, Olivia announced, bringing her remarks toward their conclusion. You'll learn to fly sophisticated aircraft in conditions that challenge the limits of human capability. Some of you will face moments of doubt, times when you question whether you belong in the cockpit of these magnificent machines. She paused, her eyes finding Lieutenant Jennifer Cross in the audience, a young pilot from Kansas whose father had been a crop duster and whose mother had cleaned offices to pay for her flight lessons. Cross represented the kind of pilot who would never have been considered under the old system, but whose natural ability and dedication had made her one of the top performers in her training class. When those moments of doubt come, Olivia continued, remember that you've earned your place here through demonstrated excellence. The sky doesn't care about your background or gender. It only respects those who approach it with skill, courage, and the absolute commitment to bring everyone home safely. After the ceremony, Olivia walked across the flight line to where the newest HH-6OW combat rescue helicopters waited in the evening light. These aircraft represented the cutting edge of rescue technology, but more importantly, they would be flown by the most capable and diverse group of pilots in Air Force history. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The first she had received from her mysterious correspondent in months. The sky you reclaimed is now open to everyone who deserves to fly there. Your father's legacy lives in every pilot you've inspired. This time the message didn't disappear, remaining as a permanent reminder of how far she had traveled from the broken civilian hiding at a Galveston maintenance hangar. Colonel Foster approached as Olivia stood watching the aircraft preparations. The SecDef wants to present you with the Meritorious Service Medal next month, she said. Recognition for your role in transforming military aviation selection and training protocols. The real recognition is seeing pilots like Lieutenant Cross succeed based on merit rather than connections, Olivia replied, knowing that her daughter won't face the barriers we had to overcome. As the sun set over Moody Air Force Base, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her from public humiliation to transformational leadership. The young woman who had once hidden her military decorations in a storage locker now wore her rank with pride, not because it validated her personally, but because it represented opportunities for countless others who would no longer be told they didn't belong in the cockpit. Hurricane Ophelia had seemed like a catastrophe when it struck the Gulf Coast, but like many storms, it had cleared away structures that had outlived their usefulness and made space for new growth. The systematic discrimination that had destroyed her career had ultimately been exposed and eliminated, creating a more just and effective system for everyone. The aircraft on the flight line would soon carry a new generation of rescue pilots into conditions that demanded the highest levels of skill and courage. Gender would be irrelevant in the cockpit, only competence would matter. Just as it should have been all along. Captain Olivia Hartwell had been told she didn't belong in the sky. Colonel Olivia Hartwell had proven that the sky belonged to anyone with the skill and courage to master it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.